Is this happening? The Devils are like a cat with 9 lives. If they beat the Buffalo Sabres, they're just 3 points out of a playoff position. Yes, you heard me right. And despite all that, people are still hunting down Tom Fitzgerald and want him gone as general manager. We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Elliott scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed it. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils Rider for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. Don't you just love parody in sports? Because the New Jersey Devils were thrown a humongous bone. What do I mean by that? Well, let's look at the out-of-town scoreboard from Thursday night, shall we? The Toronto Maple Leafs took on the Washington Capitals in Canada, and the Maple Leafs came out victorious by a score of 5-1. The Flyers lost to the Montreal Canadiens 4-1, and the Detroit Red Wings got shut out by the Carolina Hurricanes 4-0. Basically, all the teams that the Devils needed to lose in regulation did just that. None of those three teams, the Capitals, Flyers, and Red Wings, walked away with a point, which means if the Devils win later tonight when this episode goes live against the Buffalo Sabres, that means they are just 3 points behind the Washington Capitals for the second position in the wild card. And when looking at the Metropolitan Division, don't sleep on that either, because the Devils potentially could be 4 points behind the Flyers if they walk away with a victory in tonight's game. Just some food for thought. And fun fact as well, the Devils and Sabres game is the only NHL game that's playing on a Friday night. I don't think that's good scheduling, but that's a topic for another discussion. I know, basically the big talking point, can the Devils make the playoffs? That's what we're going to focus on in the first segment. Then in the second segment, we're going to talk about somewhat of a controversial topic that's been making its way throughout the Devils discourse the past few weeks, and that is the job security of Tom Fitzgerald. And then in the third and final segment, to round it all off, I will give you guys a quick preview for the game against the Sabres. I will highlight some players that I think are going to be crucial for the Devils. But on the other side of that, I'm also going to highlight some players on the Sabres that the Devils need to negate if they want any chance of winning, because I know people might look at the Sabres at first glance and say they're a young team, they're not all that good, but the similarities between the Devils and the Sabres is actually more apparent than you might realize. But that's for the third and final segment. But let's talk about the playoff implications for the Devils, because just a few weeks ago, everyone, and I mean everyone, including myself, was ready to put this season to bed. Because the one thing I talked about for the Devils this season is that they got to show me something, which is I want to believe in them, but you got to show me something, because the Devils have been very inconsistent this season. They have lost a lot of players due to injury. They were sellers at the trade deadline. They made a coaching change by firing Lindy Ruff and naming Travis Green the interim head coach. He's not even the permanent head coach. He's just a for now situation. And somehow, some way, despite the Devils never winning more than 3 games in a row, find themselves knocking on the door for the second position in the wild card. Is this real life? Is this happening? I don't want to jump the gun on anything, but the Devils do have a chance here, and they got to capitalize on it, because I don't think they're going to be given this golden of a chance again. If they lose against the Sabres, not only are they putting their backs against the wall, like I've said in plenty of past episodes recently, the Devils can only afford to drop 2 more games the rest of the year, and they still got to play the Nashville Predators, who just lost their more recent matchup to the Arizona Coyotes, just to give you guys some hope. The Toronto Maple Leafs, not once, but twice more. And also the New York Rangers. Not an easy schedule ahead for Devils, but they do have some matchups that fall into their favor, including the Pittsburgh Penguins, the New York Islanders, Maybe the Philadelphia Flyers, that's pretty much a coin toss. Maybe the Ottawa Senators, that's also a coin toss, but you get the picture, which is the Devils have to be somewhat conservative when it comes to which games they can win and which games they can lose. If I had to make a prediction, I think they can drop one of the matchups against the Maple Leafs, then against the Rangers or the Predators. You're going to have to pick one or the other, but for the time being, this game against the Sabres is definitely a must win for them. It's quite amazing that despite all the struggles, despite all the adversity that the Devils have been through, they still find a way to be on the doorstep of a possible playoff position. It's not an ideal situation, but something I've been saying the last few episodes is that at least they're giving themselves a fighting chance. That's all I could say. They're like a cat with 9 lives. And when looking at this game against the Sabres, I know a lot of people are quick to say that the Sabres are not that good of a team. The Devils should have this one in the bag. Well, if history does repeat itself, hopefully that's not the case. The Devils, they tend to win the big games like they won against the Toronto Maple Leafs, but they lose against the teams that they shouldn't be losing to. The Ottawa Senators, the Anaheim Ducks, the San Jose Sharks. I'll talk about that in a moment, but when comparing the Sabres and the Devils at first glance, this might actually surprise a lot of people. The Devils' record is 36-33-4. The Sabres' record is 34-34-5. The Devils are 5-5 their last 10 games. The Sabres are also 5-5 their last 10 games. And I know the Sabres are a young team, but honestly, the Devils are also a young team. And there's some players that can kill the Devils if they're not careful. And we're going to talk about that in the third segment. But the one thing I can give you guys hope for is that the Sabres are not riding too much positive momentum going into this matchup, because when looking at some of their previous 5 games, they won against the Seattle Kraken on March 18th, 6-2. Devils have handled the Kraken this season. I'm not really concerned about that. Against the Vancouver Canucks, the Sabres lost 3-2 on March 19th. So in that back-to-back set of games, they split it. Kind of reminds me of the Devils. March 21st against Connor McDavid, Zach Hyman, Leon Draisaitl, all those guys up in Edmonton. The Sabres got hammered 8-3. Sabres against the Flames on March 24th. The Sabres won 4-1. But in their more recent matchup on Wednesday against the Ottawa Senators, a team that the Devils have lost to recently, Ottawa won 6-2. And I think the Devils kind of woke up a sleeping giant because they have a tendency to do that. But the point I'm just trying to say is that the Devils have won 2 games in a row, and they've won a very crucial game in the Maple Leafs. And whereas the Sabres, it seems like they have been letting up a lot of goals as of late. They don't have that sort of momentum that the Devils have, despite the similarities in the last 10 games, despite the similarities in the record, despite both teams being relatively young. That's one of the reasons why I'm still somewhat confident in this game, because I think it still favors the Devils in more ways than one. And I see what everyone talks about on social media, and I'm no exception, that the Devils have lost a lot of games that were quote unquote winnable for them. And now they see themselves in this position that everyone kind of foresaw, which is they are still capable of possibly going to the playoffs, but it's not an ideal circumstance, and they're going to need a lot to go their way if they do want to sneak their way back into the playoffs for the second consecutive year, because they've lost games against the Ducks, the Sharks, the Coyotes, Canadians, Blue Jackets. And if you combine all those points, the Devils are easily in a playoff position. But you can't really dwell on that. And I want to talk about something a little bit more positive, which is I think one of the reasons why the Devils are still in this position is because they know how to win some of the marquee matchups. Because here's some games that come to mind. Remember the game in December against the Boston Bruins in which the Devils came away with an OT game-winning shot from Jack Hughes? That was the first time that the Devils beat the Boston Bruins in, 2 years? Because the last time that they had beaten the Boston Bruins, you would have to go back to the 56-game COVID season when Pavel Zacha scored the game-winning goal. It had been that long. And a lot has happened since then, because the Devils once again played a full season after that. Then the season after that, they set the franchise record in wins, and they still could not figure out that Boston Bruins team. Or remember the last time the Devils beat the Nashville Predators in Smashville in regulation? It had been years, and they came away with the victory against Andrew Brunette. Or the game back in January, which I think a lot of people are saying is one of the more exciting games of the year. Remember when Brendan Smith laid that big hit on Connor Bedard? And basically after that, all hell broke loose. Pandora's box had opened because there were a lot of Blackhawks players going after the Devils, including Nico Hischier, obviously Brendan Smith, Nathan Bastian. I think he got into a tussling match as well. And the Devils still came away with the victory, but at what cost? Because Jack Hughes did end up getting hurt later on in that game. But it was still crucial that the Devils come away with the victory because they had a tough matchup the very next day against the Vancouver Canucks. They know how to win some of those crucial games, and more recently, they won against the Winnipeg Jets and the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think that's just been the big thing for the Devils, which is they have been somewhat conservative when it comes to winning games because, yes, they don't beat the Blue Jackets one time, or they got swept by the Ducks and the Coyotes, or they lost one game to the Canadiens. I get it. I see it, and they split the season series against the Sharks, which is unacceptable. But just to highlight some of the good, they did win some big matchups, which is why they're still in this position. One more example. The Devils split the season series against the Vegas Golden Knights, the reigning Stanley Cup champions. And in the second game I was present for, the Devils fought their tails off. They played really hard, primarily Jake Allen, because that should have been a blowout victory. But what was the difference maker? It was Allen in net, and it came down to goaltending. And unfortunately, Vegas pulled away with the victory, but it does not take away from the fact that the Devils played hard, especially coming off a very tough loss against the Coyotes the night before. That's just something I want to highlight, which is, yes, the Devils have lost some games that they shouldn't have lost to, but let's not exonerate some of the good that they have done this season by winning some of those marquee matchups. All the Devils have to do is they have to just make sure that they have a strong goalie. I think it's going to be Jake Allen, and we'll talk more about this in the third segment. And they got to get some good offensive production. But where's that offense going to come from? Stick around for segment 3. Now, before we shift gears and talk about something, I guess, a little less positive, I want to tell you guys about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need, the price you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Okay, let's talk about something not so good, not so positive, which is Tom Fitzgerald and his job security, which has been a big talking point throughout the Devils discourse a few weeks ago when the season wasn't looking all that assuring, because people, including myself, were having their doubts that the Devils could possibly sneak their way into the playoffs because they had been very inconsistent. They still continue to be inconsistent, but people were saying like Tom Fitzgerald did not put this team in a good position to win. He should be fired alongside with Lindy Ruff. And I'm basically going to try to debunk those discussions because this season, I'm sure it did not go according to plan, but some of it was out of Tom Fitzgerald's hands. And the other part of it, I can't defend him in because he does need to be held accountable, but I don't think it should be to the point that he should be fired. Let's look at some of the good that he has done, which is he signed Jack Hughes to a lengthy extension, $8 million per season. Wayne Gretzky literally said that Jack Hughes has the best chance of catching Connor McDavid. And if Hughes is able to stay healthy, this might go down as one of the best contracts in the NHL because Jack Hughes is a bona fide superstar who's going to take over this league. He's going to win multiple Hart trophies, and he will not become an unrestricted free agent until the end of the 2029-2030 season. It's going to be a while before Jack Hughes is out of a Devils uniform, barring anything catastrophic happening, like he forces his way out, but this is not the NBA. Anyway, Jack Hughes and his contract, that is Tom Fitzgerald, and that is Fitzgerald locking up the franchise piece. Or Jesper Bratt, who was just an all-star, Fitzgerald was able to convince Bratt to sign below $8 million. Similar to Hughes, Bratt's going to be in New Jersey for a while. He will not become an unrestricted free agent until the end of the 2030-2031 season. And then for Timo Meier, he's annually being paid $8.8 million until the end of the 2030-2031 season, similar to Jesper Bratt. And people consider that a bit of an overpay. But if the Devils did not give him that sort of money, I guarantee you there's going to be another team that would be willing to give him that type of money. And Dougie Hamilton, all of this doesn't happen without Tom Fitzgerald getting Dougie Hamilton away from Carolina. Because remember, summer 2021, Devils were trying to be headhunters in free agency. And Dougie Hamilton, who was in the discussion for the Norris Trophy that season, signed with New Jersey for a lengthy contract. And that was the first domino piece to fall for the Devils to turn around their organization. And those are just some examples that come to mind. I think the really only bad contract you can look at is Andre Palat. But we know what the situation was, which was the Devils were aiming for Johnny Gaudreau. That was their plan A. That didn't fall into place. Gaudreau ends up signing with the Blue Jackets. And then I'm sure Palat and his agency were like, we know we were your backup. You better fork up some more money. Otherwise, you're going to lose your plan B as well. Basically putting Fitzgerald and everybody in a corner, which is why Palat signed for that lengthy contract, which obviously doesn't really look all that good, but you've got to consider the circumstances. And I'm glad that the Devils got their plan B. Getting a plan B is better than plan C, D, or E. But digressing a little bit, those are some contracts that the Devils have locked up for a long time, as in their core pieces. Nico Hischier, I didn't consider Nico Hischier because that was Ray Shero's signing, not Tom Fitzgerald, but doesn't change the fact that the Devils have their core pieces locked up for a lengthy period of time. Nico Hischier, Jack Hughes, Jesper Bratt, Dougie Hamilton, Timo Meier are here for a long period of time. And 4 of those 5 contracts do not happen without Tom Fitzgerald. And then when looking at the off seasons, I talked about Dougie Hamilton, but the 2022 off season, what did Fitzgerald do? He brought in some veteran pieces like Erik Haula, like Andre Palat, like Brendan Smith to try to change the culture in the locker room. And that proved to be huge dividends for the Devils. And Erik Haula, towards the end of last season, became a huge fan favorite. Now, the 2023 offseason was interesting for the Devils because they re-signed key assets, including Jesper Bratt and Timo Meier, but they lost Damon Severson and Ryan Graves. And a lot of people are pointing fingers saying, like, you let go 2 veteran defensemen in favor of Luke Hughes and Shimon Nemets. Let me just make something perfectly clear. The Devils had no choice but to let Graves and Severson walk. Same with Miles Wood. They had no choice but to let those players walk because that was a weak free agent class, and Damon Severson was a top 5 candidate for a lot of teams. I saw the rumors. I saw the speculation. For the first time in his career, Severson was a UFA, and he was a bottom 4 defenseman with the Devils who is still capable of being a top defenseman wherever he goes, just not with the Devils. He was going to get paid. Same with Ryan Graves. The Devils had no choice but to let them go because they still had to save up money for Timo Meier, Jesper Bratt. You got to consider Dawson Mercer this upcoming offseason. You got to consider Luke Hughes, whose entry-level contract will come to an end sooner than you realize. Same with Shimon Nemets. There's going to be a lot of players that are going to need new contracts sooner rather than later. So if you lock up Damon Severson and Ryan Graves long-term, I don't think that's a good investment. And Fitzgerald even said that he tried to convince Severson to stay, but he couldn't afford him because Severson was a top candidate for a lot of teams. But Fitzgerald's big mistake this past offseason, not improving the goaltending when people realized that maybe Vitek Vanacek and Akira Schmid weren't the right personnel to move with going forward. And I know a lot of people were big on Connor Hellebuck, and I was like, Connor Hellebuck might be a little too expensive, but I'm perfectly content with getting Vitek Vanecek and Akira Schmid back and just running it with the Devils once more. Yeah, they didn't really have the best of playoff statistics, but I was like, I'm sure it's going to be just fine for New Jersey. But obviously that didn't really come into fruition, and Connor Hellebuyck ended up just staying with the Jets on a lengthy extension. And then Yegor Sharangovich, I talked about it in my previous episode. I don't think he had really much of a future with the Devils, and Devils got Tyler Toffoli, and they got 2 draft picks out of Toffoli because they dealt him away at the trade deadline. Never know. Maybe those 2 draft picks can either be trade collateral, or maybe the Devils will keep those draft picks and they'll draft a couple studs. But I think the big thing that also needs to be taken into question was, how much did Tom Fitzgerald know about Michael McLeod and his situation? Because he re-signed McLeod to a 1-year extension, and people were like, okay, maybe McLeod just needs to prove that he's consistent a little bit more before Fitzgerald commits. But McLeod was one of the better face-off personnel last season for the Devils as well, and he definitely showed some spark plug type energy. I was surprised when it was just a 1-year extension, especially since Nathan Bastian re-signed for a 2-year extension. I was just a little confused. And then obviously when the Team Canada scandal came back into the light in January, and Cal Foot and Michael McLeod had to take a leave of absence from the team to go back to Canada to turn themselves in, the big question was, how much did Tom Fitzgerald know about it? And I'm just like, everyone knew about the Team Canada situation. And it wasn't a matter if, it was a matter of when. Like, when would this actually happen? Like, because when I did my reaction to the whole situation back in January, I said it was both surprising and not surprising, because I knew it was coming, just didn't know when. But when it did actually happen, I was still shell-shocked, if that makes sense. And I think that's something else that needs to be considered a lot, which is, how much did you know about the Team Canada scandal? Weren't the Flyers also trying to trade Carter Hart, but no teams were budging just because they knew about the situation as well? That's just what I heard. So yes, Fitzgerald has done a lot of good for the Devils, and this season didn't go as planned, but I still think he has geared this Devils team up for success. But he does need to be held accountable for a couple things. One, not handling Michael McLeod the best way he could have handled him. And going back to the offseason 2023, he should have tried to get a goalie. He really should have. And I will admit I was wrong, because I thought Vitek Vanecek and Akira Schmid will be just fine heading to the season, and obviously that shouldn't have been the case. But looking at the future, I still think the Devils are capable of doing so many great things, and their core can definitely take them to a lot of places. But I don't think it makes sense to fire Tom Fitzgerald, because why fire Tom Fitzgerald? Hire somebody else that might take the team in a new direction, and it might not be a direction that you agree with, when you still have something special forming here in New Jersey. It just didn't go as planned, because a lot of things just didn't go the Devils' way. That's my advice to a lot of Devils fans, which is, you just got to be patient. And I think Devils fans are no strangers to being patient, because Devils have only been competitive in the playoffs, like twice in the last 10 or so years. But that's just my 2-cent opinion. Okay, we're going to talk briefly about the Sabres and Devils upcoming matchup. But before we continue, let me tell you about FanDuel, because March Madness is happening and my bracket went back into the high 90s. I'm happy once again. Say goodbye to busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney, whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed. It's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Please remember to always gamble responsibly. All right, let's talk about this matchup for the Devils. I talked about it in the first segment, which is, on paper, I know a lot of people like to say that this should be an easy win for the Devils, but make no mistake, they're definitely going to have their work cut out for them. Here's a couple players I have highlighted: Nico Hischier and Jake Allen. Specifically, Nico Hischier and his line mates in Timo Meier and Jesper Bratt. They're going to have to set the tone early, in my opinion, because Nico Hischier, great two-way player. We saw this happen in the game against the Maple Leafs, in which Hischier walked away with 3 points, and He helped Luke Hughes score the opening goal for the Devils. And later on in that period, Nico Hischier scored his own respective goal. Timo Meier, he has been on fire last few games. Hopefully he continues that. Jesper Bratt is still putting up some decent point production the last 15 or so games, just not scoring at a high clip that I'm sure he was accustomed to. But anyway, those three players, specifically Nico Hischier centering it off, I need them to have big performances against the Buffalo Sabres because this is a must-win. It's a marquee matchup, and the Devils have a chance to shock the NHL. But on the other side of that, they need strong goaltending. Put Jake Allen back in net. Devils had a couple days off, and I think Jake Allen will be good to go against the Sabres. Now, when looking at the other side of things, keep an eye out for JJ Peterka because he leads all Sabre skaters in goals, even strength goals, and even strength points during this season. Peterka has set new single-season career highs in goals and points, and he needs just one assist to surpass his previous single-season career high in that category, which was 20. And here's a bigger problem. Rasmus Dahlin. He leads all Sabre skaters in assists, points, power play points, and time on the ice per game. Entering March 28th, Dahlin was tied for third amongst all NHL defensemen in goals with 17, and he ranked 9th amongst all NHL defensemen in points. So the Devils, they have a few key players. Same with the Sabres. You got to keep an eye out for Peterka and Dahlin. And if the Devils can try to negate them a little bit, then I think they're going to be just fine. And in net for the Buffalo Sabres, I believe it's going to be Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. I don't really have much on him. I just wanted to say his name because I think that is one of the best names in the NHL. But I still think this is a matchup that favors the Devils, but they cannot underestimate the Sabres. And I am just keeping my fingers crossed because the Sabres are not a top-notch team in the NHL, but that hasn't stopped the Devils from coming out and losing end before. This is a golden opportunity. I don't know how many chances they're going to get, but if the Devils do end up losing the game against Sabres, I'm just saying if, hypothetically, quintessential 2023-2024 season for the Devils. Anyway, leave your thoughts down below. What do you think of the chances of the Devils making the playoffs? And what do you think of Tom Fitzgerald as general manager? Do you like him? Should he be fired? Curious to hear your guys' thoughts. Leave a comment down below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on podcast streaming service, hit me up on my personal X Page app at TreyMatt4 or the show's X Page app at Locked On Devils. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. Continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day in New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys next episode. Thanks for listening once again.